"Sir, this ship doesn't take tourists." One of the young officers pointed at the veteran standing at the base of the USS Horn's ramp, while other service members boarded without even noticing him. The 62-year-old man took a step back, his eyes locked on the ship, breathing slowly. He was noticing flaws no one else could see. No one there had any idea they'd just turned away the only man who could help them. Let's dive into this story. Thomas Hollis kept a strict routine. His body, still in tune with the Navy's rhythm, didn't make allowances. Before the alarm had a chance to ring, he was already sitting on the edge of the bed, feet touching the cold floor of his small apartment in Norfolk, Virginia. The heater creaked as it came on. It was an old model, more likely to cough than to warm anything. Thomas made his way through the narrow hallway to the kitchen, where a drip coffee maker was slowly doing its job. On the counter, a navy blue mug with the U.S. Navy emblem was already waiting for him. It was the only one he'd used since returning to civilian life. At 62, Thomas was a solitary man. He had a few friends scattered across the country, former shipmates who called on birthdays. But routine was his only constant companion. He picked up odd jobs as a naval maintenance technician, usually fixing civilian boat engines. The work came in slowly. What he earned covered the essentials and not much else. On the living room shelf, 3 objects shared space with old nautical engineering books. A scale model of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, a faded photo of him with other sailors in combat uniforms on a ship's deck, and a small scratched metal plaque that read, USS Horn, the indomitable cruiser. Thomas cleaned that plaque every week with a damp cloth, as if it were still part of something alive. The USS Horn, DLG-30, a warship that had been decommissioned for years, had recently been reactivated as a floating base for tactical training. Thomas found that out from a small notice on the bulletin board at the dock where he sometimes worked on engines. It was printed in small letters. Authorized visits with prior clearance, USS Horn, Pier 7. That morning, he crossed the city by bus, then walked about 20 minutes to Pier 7. The sea wind sliced through his clothes, carrying the familiar scent of rust, salt, and marine gas oil. When he saw the ship in the distance, something inside him froze. The gray hull, with its raw utilitarian lines, the bow, stern, port, and starboard, looked exactly as he remembered. Above the command tower, the American flag flapped with purpose, and below it the name Horn, painted in faded letters worn by time. Thomas paused for a few seconds before moving forward. The sound of the waves crashing against the pier and the soft groan of the mooring ropes were almost comforting. As he approached the boarding ramp, Thomas saw the movement of the young officers. They were organizing a group of Naval Academy students, newly arrived officers, and authorized personnel. That's when he tried to step closer, still silent, holding a sheet of paper in his hand. "Sir, this ship doesn't take tourists." One of the young officers pointed at the veteran standing at the foot of the USS Horn's ramp, while other service members boarded without even noticing him. Thomas didn't reply. He took a step back, eyes fixed on the ship. He scanned it in a way only he could. Then he slipped the paper into his pocket and turned around to go home. It was just another day. But that day, they made a terrible mistake. 2 days later, Thomas returned to the pier. He kept his distance, watching. The USS Horn was still there, docked like a sleeping giant. On deck, men and women moved quickly, preparing to board a new group: cadets, instructors, and technical support staff. A tactical exercise was scheduled to take place on board that week. Among those directing the boarding, he recognized the officer who had turned him away days before, a tall young man with a serious look. His name was stitched on his uniform, McConnell. Thomas had no intention of interfering. But as he watched, something caught his eye. On the pier, a man in a white linen suit with a blue badge was talking to 2 technicians nearby. He was pointing at a secondary electrical connection panel on the ship. The technicians gestured uncertainly. Thomas walked over slowly. The group didn't notice him until he was just a few steps away. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "That looks like the old thermal control room bypass system. If you're using a direct line, it could overload the propulsion system's auxiliary sensors." All 3 men turned at once. The youngest just frowned. The older man looked Thomas up and down. "Do you work here, sir?" "No," Thomas replied. "But if you'll allow me, I can show you how to work around it safely." The younger technician crossed his arms. "With all due respect, sir, we already have an engineering team on board." Before Thomas could answer, a voice cut through the air behind them. "Is there a problem here?" It was the same young officer, McConnell. The technician quickly chimed in. "This man was trying to advise our team, but he's not authorized to be here." McConnell looked at the technician, then turned to Thomas. "You're starting to get a little persistent, sir. We've already made it clear this is a restricted operation. Civilians can't hang around military installations." One of the technicians smirked, trying to hide it. "I understand," Thomas said, keeping his voice level. "Just thought I could help avoid a mistake." McConnell stepped forward. He wasn't rude, but the coldness in his tone weighed more than any shout. Thomas looked at the ship again. To him, the problem was obvious, but no one else saw it. The system was overloaded and the sensors weren't receiving the proper signal. He tried once more. "Are you still using the original cooling system on the panels? Or did you switch to the redundant backup?" "That's none of your concern," McConnell cut him off. "I need you to leave." Thomas looked down for a moment, then he simply nodded. "Of course. My apologies." He turned and started walking slowly down the pier. Each step heavy, the walk of someone who'd just been dismissed. Behind him, McConnell spoke quietly into his radio. "Control, this is McConnell. Civilian attempting unauthorized access. He's leaving now. No immediate threat, but log the incident." "Copy that, sir. We'll keep an eye out." As he walked, Thomas heard the water lapping against the hull, the creaking of the mooring lines, the metallic echoes coming from inside the ship. He slowly ran his hand along the side of the horn, like greeting an old forgotten friend. On ships like this, he'd handled every kind of emergency at sea, from electrical failures to full propulsion breakdowns. It was his job to fix them, and he did. But here, in this moment, his past meant nothing. The next morning, a failure interrupted the training simulation aboard the USS Horn. The central thermal control system overloaded. 2 panels burned out. Safety sensors triggered an automatic shutdown of the auxiliary engines. The exercise had to be canceled, and the crew was evacuated from the lower compartment as a precaution. No one was hurt, but the technical report was clear. It was exactly the kind of issue Thomas had tried to warn them about the day before. Lieutenant McConnell was called in for a meeting with the officer in charge of the operation, Admiral Hillard, with over 40 years of service and eyes trained to see what others missed. "Lieutenant, why didn't any of the engineers catch this?" "We don't know yet, sir." "And no one knows how to fix it?" "Sir, there was a civilian yesterday who mentioned something about this problem, but he wasn't authorized. I thought it best to have him removed." "What was his name?" McConnell hesitated. "I'm not sure, sir." Hillard stared at him for a long moment. The Horn was reactivated with part of its original system. The team that designed that is likely long retired. The Admiral turned to his computer and opened the ship's technical archive. At the bottom of the document, one name was listed as Chief Supervisor of the original maintenance systems, Thomas Hollis. Hillard clicked another file. The full service record opened. 20 years active duty. Naval Maintenance Specialist. 3 consecutive tours aboard the USS Horn. Commendation for rapid response during a failure at sea. Final Navy recommendation. Highly technical, natural leader. Trusted in critical situations. Hillard stood from his chair. "Get that man back, now." By late morning, Lieutenant McConnell left the meeting with one name on his mind. Thomas Hollis. He asked his aide to dig through local records. There was no phone number or current address in Navy files, but someone mentioned the man had done some odd jobs at the Norfolk shipyard. An hour later, one of the technicians came back with the info. Thomas was doing small repairs at the marina next to the pier, fixing engines, inspecting rescue boats, off the Navy's books. McConnell went in person. He found Thomas leaning against a grounded fishing boat, wrench in hand, reading glasses hanging from the collar of his shirt. "Hollis?" Thomas looked up calmly, recognizing the lieutenant's uniform. He wiped his hands on a rag. There was a silence between them that didn't need words. "Could we talk for a moment?" McConnell asked. "Would you meet me at Pier 7 at 3 p.m.? I'll be there." 2 hours later, Thomas walked slowly up the ramp of the Horn. This time, no one stopped him. On deck, a small team was waiting. Hillard stood at the front, McConnell behind him. Beside them, 2 engineers involved in the earlier system failure. The Admiral stepped forward and extended a firm hand. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Hollis." Thomas shook it, still a bit guarded. "Sir, I never meant to cause trouble." "You didn't," Hillard said, turning to the others. "Mr. Hollis was responsible for installing and maintaining the original system our engineers fried yesterday. He knew every power line on this ship before most of you were even born." McConnell took a deep breath. "Mr. Hollis, I made a mistake. I dismissed your experience, treated you like just another outsider. I'd like to apologize." Thomas looked at the young officer for a moment. There was sincerity in his voice. No attempt to save face, just a clear admission that he'd judged too quickly. "You did what you thought was right, Lieutenant." Hillard stepped forward again. "Hollis, we'd like you to assist as part of the technical team. Will you accept?" Thomas glanced around the deck with quiet nostalgia. There was no way he could say no. The control room was quiet as Thomas entered with the engineers. The panels had been replaced overnight, but part of the compensation system still showed unstable readings. No one had managed to fix them. Thomas approached the main console. He ran his hand slowly along the side of the structure. "This component, is that an adapted version of the original?" One of the engineers nodded, somewhat embarrassed. "Yes. The original model was discontinued. We rigged a workaround, but..." Thomas knelt beside the panel and checked the back. "The insulation here is too weak. If the ship goes out in open water and picks up constant moisture, it's going to fail again, maybe within a week. The solution," he continued, "is to isolate and reconnect the autothermal control, recalibrate the affected sensors, and fix the electrical bypass through the secondary board to avoid future overloads." Hillard watched silently, arms crossed. This wasn't just a technical fix anymore, it was a reunion between a ship and the man who for so many years had known it better than anyone. Hours later, the system was stable. All readings matched. The sensors were running at full efficiency. In the briefing room, Hillard gave one final remark before dismissing the team. "Most of you learned by following manuals, but Mr. Hollis learned through sleepless nights at sea, when what was at stake wasn't just a system. It was the lives of the men inside this steel hull." The following week, the USS Horn completed its first full emergency simulation at sea since being reactivated. Everything ran smoothly. No sensor failures, no electrical or mechanical issues. The final report, signed by Admiral Hillard, included an unusual note: technical success largely achieved thanks to the guidance and expertise of Thomas Hollis. His deep understanding of the Horn's operational foundations was essential to our success. Thomas read that line sitting at his kitchen table, in silence. The printed document had been hand-delivered by a young sailor at the marina, with instructions to give it directly to him. He didn't say a word, just folded it carefully and tucked it into a worn envelope, among old bills and yellowed photographs. The next morning, just after dawn, the Horn was set to depart on its official open-sea revalidation mission. But for someone who knew ships like Thomas did, it wasn't just a mission. It was a kind of rebirth. He arrived at the pier before anyone else. The sky was still a dark blue, with hints of orange on the horizon. The sound of seagulls mixed with the creaking of steel cables, and the water reflected the first lights from the dockside warehouses. Thomas stood quietly, a bit away from the main activity. All he brought was an old, faded Navy cap. From the upper deck, someone spotted him. McConnell came down the steps slowly, approaching with a reserved smile. "You came to say goodbye." "Couldn't miss it," Thomas replied. They stood there for a moment in silence, watching the crew organize the lines, load the last supplies, run the final checks. "You could have stayed on board," McConnell said. The team wanted you to join the voyage. I already did, Thomas said, his voice steady. A long time ago, now it's your turn. McConnell nodded. Thank you, really, for what you taught us, and the way you taught it. A few minutes later, the engines roared to life. The mooring lines were released. A deep hum filled the salty air. The USS Horn began to move, slowly gliding down the exit channel like a giant waking from sleep. Thomas didn't move. He simply watched, following every foot the ship traveled. Then with one hand, he gently ran his fingers along the side of his cap, pressing it against his chest in a quiet, personal salute. As the Horn crossed the end of the pier and its hull blended into the deep blue of the sea, Thomas took a long breath and looked toward the horizon. There was nowhere else he needed to be, because now the ship was sailing forward, and part of him was sailing with it. If you enjoyed this story, click the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next.